First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and having me here. As Tina said, I am representing IOM Turkey country office, and I am here with my capacity of focal point on integration issues in Turkey. Yet we don't have any full-fledged integration program yet due to the context, and we will be hopefully having an integration program soon with the new and recent migration management change in the country. Actually, I am asked to talk on how IOM relates to research and academia. In fact, actually, this issue made me come here as IOM Turkey is an associated partner of INTEGRIM project. And as I said, as a focal point of integration issues, it's very good to be exposed to these discussions at the EU level and through the outcomes of this project. I very appreciate being here again, and I will not go into detail of presenting IOM and all, but I will be talking today and give a brief overview of IOM's research portfolio and capacities program objectives. And then I would like to talk on two recent research led by IOM to illustrate the perspective of the organization on research and policy nexus. Then, lastly, and then, very much linked to this issue, we'll continue with a snapshot on the role of data management for this nexus, and we'll conclude my presentation with asking some questions, to better understand research policy partnership and to understand the level of this nexus. Actually, research and more specifically policy-oriented research, whether at the global level or local level or regional level, is one of the cross-cutting program areas of IOM, and it is indeed included in the constitution of IOM, which is called 12-point strategy. And IOM conducts and manages applied research on mainstream migration sectors and migration policy issues to enhance IOM's program delivery and to enable IOM to serve as the primary reference point on migration. To give an example of being a reference point on migration, I can, mention this World Migration Report. You may already know this, and in the eight of this IOM's report, which will be eight. Will focus on the issue of local partnerships, and precisely the name of the upcoming report will be on migrants and cities, new partnerships to manage urban mobility. This report aims to promote active discussion on this new urban partnerships at local levels for enhanced inclusion of migrants in the city planning and development. This may be interest of you when it is out. And there are other publications, research publications, like Migration Research Series, Migration Policy Practice, and International Migration Journal, and among others. As I said, IOM conducts research through its own capacity or, commissioning some of these reports, and runs research-based projects in strategic areas of interest. And through doing so, it also identifies and promotes and fosters strategic technical partnerships globally in the area of migration research. And to name a few of research cooperation of IOM, I can say partnerships with well-known organizations and initiatives like Global Migration Group, GFMD, Gallup, ACP, like African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States, Migration Policy Institute. One of the main significant features of IOM's research is that they are mostly policy-oriented and aims to shape migration policy agendas. And to this end, I am also provides technical expert advice to governments and institutions and support efforts to enhance research and data management capacities of governments and other bodies in order to contribute to sound policy making. Given this background, I can say that IOM's research can be broadly divided into two main categories: applied research to help IOM offices to design and implement various programs, and policy-oriented research designed to provide policy guidance to IOM's member states. Both categories of research are a systematic investigation for adding new knowledge. For that reason, they should follow rules of scientific inquiry to maintain the trustworthiness and reliability of findings. IOM research tends to be strong in describing the local context in which various patterns of migration occur. I think it is one of the main strengths of IOM in general, because we have offices more than 400 places, countries in all globally. So we have this privilege of understanding the local contexts better. And these researches are carried out in order to better define a local problem by providing evidence through indications and testimonies, identifying trends, presenting findings as a contribution to a growing knowledge base, and exploring new aspects. Confirmation that certain pattern exists or that previous findings continue to be the case or have changed is often a main objective of research projects. It's more like, trend analysis and also profiling and such kind of general, objectives. And of course, I should mention also another objective of research is to support and inform interventions. And behind this focus, there is a logic that there is a problem needs a solution. So most of the IOM projects are designed and developed to conclude with some set of recommendations for actions. Actually, this when we have cooperation with researchers and academia, we find that there may be some difficulties to come up with recommendations in the findings. Although policymakers or the practitioners are more interested in such kind of recommendations. On the other hand, this may be, found by the researchers that academicians are very straightforward and, and generalizing. So it is important to, to combine such, common ground to come up with, recommendations feasible for or sound for policymakers, and also scientifically proved by researchers and academicians. And having said that, the objectives of the research engagements of IOM, I would like to mention about IOM's two recent research initiatives, which may illustrate better the organization policy and research approach. Actually, IOM has identified 4 main challenges for the year of 2015, and these 4 key challenges are recognizing the migration impact of humanitarian crisis, saving migrants' lives, changing public perceptions of migration, and integrating migration into the post-2015 development agenda. I will only talk about the 2 of them, where IOM is responding these challenges through conducting some researches. One of them is about saving migrants' life. As you may know, as we all know, irregular migration by sea is not a new phenomenon. But in the recent years, the numbers have grown, border controls have been tightened, and routes have been more dangerous. This has resulted in a significant loss of life and unknown numbers of missing migrants and refugees. Yet there is an acute lack of accurate or often any information about this. That deaths, and there is a pressing need to improve methods of recording, identification, and tracing. IOM's 2014 report on entitled Fatal Journeys, Tracking Lives Lost During Migration, was the first comprehensive attempt to assess the number of deaths occurring globally. I will not go into details of its findings. You may have seen many coverages referring to this report after all these incidents happened to increase in the Mediterranean. I just would like to say that this missing migration project's research component will be advanced through a new research and research report, which is called Human Smuggling and Migrant Deaths, a global report. And this study will also bring together the cutting-edge research on the hidden practices of human smuggling around the globe. Action to record fatalities and establish identities is both a matter of a good policy and a central component of human rights duty to respect the right to life and calls states to take action. So this report and similar ones informs policymakers about the seriousness of the issue to take action. These kind of reports calls responsible authorities to take actions. Similarly, there is another persistent challenge in the migration field, which is about misperception of migration, as we all know. We are witnessing rise of anti-migrant sentiment in much of the developed world. Poor public perception of migrants has restricted the ability of politicians to develop realistic and evidence-based policies to manage migration and integration. There is a risk that immigration policies in many countries will be shaped by fears and misconception rather than facts and a strategic outlook for the future. We have a forthcoming IOM report, How the World Views Migration. It provides an insight into the public attitudes towards migration around the world. Drawing on the data from the Gallup World Poll, the report presents for the first time a global overview of what people worldwide think about migration. Regardless of this study's findings, I will not go into detail. I would like to make a point that gathering the facts and figures on migration, as well as in analyzing and using such evidence for policy purposes, is commonly recognized as one way to improve communication about migration. Better awareness of migration-related facts and of the positive contributions of migrants will facilitate the implementation of integration measures and reduce the likelihood of extremism and xenophobia. Of course, more work is needed from all sides to understand what shapes individual perceptions of immigrants and to address people's concerns about immigration, promote an informed debate on the matter, and to bring it to the voices of migrants themselves. After given this IOM's contribution to the sound policy making through research, I would like to also briefly mention about the importance of data management for the evidence-based policy making, as all stakeholders involved in the research on needs to access and use some data produced at the national level, and regardless of types of research that you are going to conduct. Therefore, IOM activities in the field of migration aims to enhance the capacity of governments to collect reliable and comprehensive statistics and data on migration. And I will list some of the IOM's engagements in the data collection and management. This will not only gives us some insight what the IOM does in this field, but also some insights may give some insights what are the main essential components of data management and collection when it comes to research and policy nexus. Actually, IOM tries to contribute to the efforts towards the creation of more reliable and harmonized statistics on international migration. Widely differing definitions of migration and data collection methodologies prevents efforts to collect more comparative and reliable data on migration. IOM is involved in methodological work to improve migration measurements through better collection of metadata and improved estimates of migration flows and stocks. IOM is also working on building governmental capacities in collecting and sharing reliable and timely data on migration. Knowledge about how to collect data in any migration-related field, be it border management, counter-trafficking, or labor migration, how to process it, and to move from a single administrative record to reliable statistic is lacking in many countries, especially in those where migration management systems are still in formation. For example, in Turkey, we are supporting the government to establish such systems. IOM is trying to increase its activities on capacity building in data management through a bottom-up approach by providing targeted assistance at the national level, while facilitating regional dialogue and information exchange between countries. Another area of involvement of IOM is to improve the use of and dissemination of internal data, because IOM, as I said, is present globally, and the organization collects a wealth of data on migration through its projects worldwide. These data is primarily designed for operational and administrative purposes. It facilitates analysis and dissemination of IOM's internal data for policy planning and research. And furthermore, we are taking a role on mainstreaming migration questions into population census and other existing surveys. Population censuses are widely used instruments for collecting data and perhaps provide the most comprehensive source of internationally comparable information on international migration in the world. National statistical offices have taken an increasing interest in mainstreaming migration questions in this and other surveys. Given its close relations to the government and to the migrant community, IOM is playing an active role in advising governments on the design and assisting in the implementation of population censuses and other specialized surveys. Lastly, IOM is enhancing collaboration with other international actors in migration statistics. As you may know, there are other number of international organizations and initiatives have been active in this area, such as UNDESA, UNDP, ILO, OECD, Eurostat, so therefore it is in everyone's interest that more advanced information sharing and collaboration is pursued among organizations to avoid any duplication of activities and ensure the trust of partner governments. Although some of these actions seems to be concern of new migration or immigration countries, it is highly important in mainstreaming into data management policies, which will have eventually an overall impact for all countries subject to migration. Given this background on IOM's research capacity and outlook on migration data, I would like to lastly touch upon some challenges in research policy nexus, especially for the countries like Turkey, which has been recently regarded as a country of migration. Of course, this question can be applied in other contexts, but we have been specifically asked by the government to identify some of the limitations or the potentials when it comes to academia and researchers' collaboration with the policymakers and practitioners to contribute to the national migration debates. To this end, I would like to list some limitations to make use of research in the field of migration. If I list them, I can start with like problems in access to evidence-based scientific resources and to standardized data. Limited interest to the subject from social science and research world to this topic. It is more valid for the countries like Turkey, although it is improving with the visibility of the issue after the Syrian crisis in the context of Turkey. Lack of resources allocated by the both state and other institutions for social research on the issue of migration. Lack of understanding among policymakers about the need for such research findings and to make use of these findings for their policymaking efforts. Another limitation may be lack of means or willingness for policymakers to reflect research evidences when they need to respond to a situation in a limited time or in a limited context and like quickly. So they may refrain from using the evidences, and they may rather prefer to come up with some straightforward policy options. And this can be actually commonly a case for the countries, especially for the countries like Turkey. And another limitation, actually, the issues politicization and the gap between the policymakers and research. Why we were looking at the examples of the policy and research collaborations in the world, we have reviewed the example, the case of Australia. And back in 60s, the Migration Authority has created its own research department to conduct such policy-oriented policies. Yet, with the change in the 1996, with the Liberal Party government, it was shut down. So this relationship is subject to constant change as well. I try to give some examples of the limitations, but it is also important to highlight that political consensus among different interest groups in establishing or monitoring the debate to contribute for policy making is significant, because new positions of emerging with the newcomers to the society, and there may be some inabilities of reflecting their interests and rights to the policy programs and institution structures. So the collection of different opinions and suggestions and assessments in policy making is quite significant. In this sense, the role of researchers and academicians in many issues affecting policy making process, such as identifying the questions in sufficient and consistent manners, high quality data collection and dissemination, identifying unintended results and impacts of policies, are highly recognized and considered as significant. States also put in place some mechanisms to be effective for policy making and assessments, such as developing various information databases, building networks to collect data within and out of countries, commissioning researchers to different state institutions. As academics and researchers, as independent actors from the state, whether carrying out research commissioned directly by the governments, or not, they take important responsibilities in conducting scientific independent research, producing new paradigms and approaches which may facilitate transforming knowledge and biased contexts, in the biased contexts. I mentioned about this wide range of models, from structured relationship to exclusion of research from policymaking processes. I gave the example of Australia, which started as as a structured model when the government opened its own research center. We see also other examples of excluding research actors from the policymaking processes. Actually, politicization of the issue is quite central in the determining this policy research nexus. But even if there is politicization of the issue, we see that the researchers are continuing their work in establishing new forms of partnerships and centers to conduct policy-oriented research, regardless of being organic part of the state institutions, to contribute in identifying emerging issues and paradigms. Keeping in mind these diverse form of relationship, I would like to conclude with few questions in this complex relationship. Is there a need to settle the relationship level, and can we measure the impact of the configuring the policy research relationship, or should there be a criteria to set for determining the institutions or state research relationship? Or there will be any criteria to accept some actors in the networks of research or centers and all. And what will be the impact of funding issues when it comes to research policy relations? What will be the roles of centers of migration research? How their independency can be ensured? How to measure, compare policy operational impacts of scientific researchers commissioned by government agencies and the researches conducted by independent research? What will be the channels, methods for communicating research results in effective and right manners to reach out to policymakers? As IOM, we actually see this as a quite common problem. Although there are many good researchers pointing out right, policy recommendations, there may be some there are some gaps in communicating the results to the makers and to have the right reach out strategies. And the last one, actually, what would be the role of researchers in collecting and analyzing data other than the metadata made available by the states? Because we know that not only the state is producing data, we have also other actors active in the field, like NGOs or other institutions who have direct link interactions with the migrants groups, and they may have very high quality data, but this should be transformed into the evidence through some research or some analysis, and then the researchers could have some roles in being mediator in both sides. So I would like to conclude that IOM is kind of, these are more like our reflections from the field while working and giving importance to research. IOM is well positioned in between research and policymakers, and we have some means to analyze how to communicate research results and establish right partnerships and at what level. So we will, I think, continue in the upcoming period to facilitate such relationship. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Miral. I think we do have 15-20 minutes to have a bit of a debate. So maybe I will just take advantage of being here for studying with them. I would be very interested, and this goes for you, but for Sheena as well, that you've mentioned that you sometimes either collect data with your own, within the IOM, with the people working in it, or commission reports. And I was wondering how, because I know that, for instance, the situation here at the University of Deusto, every once in a while, the Institute of Human Rights gets commissioned reports by the Basque government, for example, because there is a history of a relation, etc. How do international organizations such as IOM or FRA go about selecting what kind of partners, what kind of research institutes, or I know that I'm sure there are already kind of established networks, particularly within the IOM being within the wider UN structure. You mentioned UNDP, UNDESA, etc. But on the field, or is there kind of a research academic network that obviously you are part of this INTEGRIM network. So also, how did that come about in the first place? And then there was Reinhard.
Yeah, I would just like to raise a word of caution, I guess, which also speaks to some of the issues that you raised in your questions towards the end. Because, I mean, as much as I would like my own research and research in general, of course, to have a tangible and sustainable impact on policies and policy making, I think it's also very important to keep in mind that this very gap that is to be bridged here also has a fundamental importance and value in itself. And this has to do, of course, with the independence, freedom, disconnectedness between the production of knowledge and its use. And I was just thinking of the area of biomedical research, for example, where this nexus between its application, which is the production of medicine in this case, is very strong, and it is now regarded as very problematic as well, and lots of negative effects of that can be seen. Now, I'm not suggesting that IOM or my government is Monsanto, of course, but in a certain way they both represent interests that not necessarily, they may well, but not necessarily represent this kind of, whatever we want to call it, wider public interest, which is not the interest of consumers, and it's not supposed to be the interest of certain citizens, but something broader, which I think is supposed to guide knowledge production rather than the hope that it will change a very particular thing in how things are regulated in practice. So I guess I'm just advocating for not trying to take this bridging too far in a way. Thanks.
Sure.
So thank you, Meral, for your presentation. I found it really interesting what you were saying about trying to mainstream and integrate some questions about migration into the population census, which is also something that is continually an issue for us in the work on Roma, of course. So the question to you is, what exact kind of questions are you proposing to integrate? Is it questions about plans for migration, or is it background data and personal data about the individual, like where did they come from? Is it questions related to economic transfers, maybe like remittances? I don't know what kind of questions you're considering. I find it very interesting, but I was also wondering about maybe data protection issues, if you've encountered any of those debates about maybe collecting sensitive data about individuals within census. This is a challenge we have in particular when it comes to Roma, because it's questions about ethnicity and their national data protection laws that are prohibiting the collection of this kind of sensitive data within the census, so it's not even possible. So I'm wondering what challenges you're facing when it comes to issues of migration. And maybe if I could abuse the position to answer, to respond also to the point about knowledge production and your question about commissioning of reports. So I fully support your point, because I think that not every research should be feeding into policy. It's completely legitimate, and I think research should also be done for the sake of research and just done for the sake of knowledge production. So this is only my personal opinion. I don't think it's... Yeah, I think that both have merit, but there is, of course, potential for bridging this gap a bit, and for those who are interested, maybe it's for every individual researcher to decide for themselves like what they would like their research to also be linked to, and to understand and be aware that there would be possibilities, and there are needs, I think, from the policy side to have stronger connections to research. But of course the issue of independence, I think, is also one that's not going away, but everyone is biased in some sense, even NGOs who are supposed to be pushing, they're always pushing, of course, also certain agendas. So I don't think you can ever be completely non-biased. Even as a researcher, you're getting funding and support from certain sources, or government institutions getting state budget to support their research work. So I think this issue of bias will always be there. So maybe it's just a question of being open and honest and acknowledging the sort of limitations and frameworks within which research is done. What kind of research is it? I think that maybe should always be the disclaimer in the beginning, just as we are always acknowledging the limitations of methodology or whatever, that those are the constraints that we face. In terms of commissioning reports, I can just say from the Fundamental Rights Agency perspective that we work with this network, which is always changing partners. So we have in each member state a FRANET, we call it a research network partner, and those are often like national human rights institutions, or in some countries there's like the Helsinki Commission for Human Rights. But we also work with research centers, and sometimes also research departments within universities. And so this network changes every few years, and whenever we have social or legal research to conduct, we are reaching out to that network. And then through different calls, we often work with universities as well, who are applying as part of partnership consortiums to specific project calls. So, but it's not always that we have the liberty to choose, we like this one, we could work with them, but if they are applying for project, I think that is also the way it normally works with the EU-funded projects.
Yeah, if I try to respond to your question, I think it's more or less our approach is same with yours. I can talk about our country offices, how we cooperate with research and researchers and academia. We are mostly counting on our established networks and partnerships with research institutions. We have quite a few research centers in Turkey, and they are more into the policy-oriented research. So whenever you have a research to commission, they come to our mind and we approach them. But more and more, our interventions are, the scope of our interventions are getting larger. We try to identify other experts and researchers with whom we don't have any previous collaboration. So in this case, we are trying to open for calls to reach some researchers who are expert in the field, emerging fields of IOM Turkey. Otherwise, it is quite obvious for us with whom to work and to collaborate.
More questions or comments? Ilka.
And also about the census. Sorry. Sorry. So actually, I honestly to speak, I am not like in a position to answer your question properly because I am not a data management expert. But as far as I know from our experience in Turkey, we have commissioned a report to and research center on the data collection and sharing in Turkey. We are actually like in the Turkish case, we are lacking a basic questions like in the population censuses, giving reference to migration. Like we don't, for example, count people with who are born outside of country and the time of duration of stay in the country, and these kind of very simple questions are not included and mainstream in the population censuses in Turkey. So this is just a basic example, but I fully agree with your point. And as I try, actually, it was not very explicit that while I was trying to explain the research policy nexus, of course there are some researchers who are being conducted just to to analyze the situation or give some represent some approaches, and but on the other hand there are really some researchers who can feed into the policy, and these researchers who are conducting such research are directly approaching us, or they would like to be involved in such policy-making processes through sharing their findings with us. So there is no kind of pressure on that, but I also understand that there is a thin line between this relation.
I think it would have been better to frame it as a real question, which it was not, obviously. But the question would then be whether you would say it's possible to establish this nexus in a way that it works only one way, so that research would, if it wants or is directed that way, potentially influence policy, but not the other way around. Is that possible, or what would it require in terms of institutional setups?
So I couldn't really get well your question. Could you repeat?
But if you see the research policy nexus as something that can be set up in a way that it only works one way, so that research has an influence and impact on policy, but not policy impacts the way research is conducted or the direction it takes, or...
I think it's a both-way relationship, like the mutual relationship. When you commission a specific research to contribute to policy-making processes, this is more a one-way relationship. On the other hand, there are researchers who don't have set objectives to contribute policy making. They may like unintended or impacts on policy.
If I'm
provide an example on it, actually. This is very critical. I really would like to criticize that in that sense. So in Turkey, Turkey has passed this new law in 2013, law on foreigners and temporary protection. Okay.
International protection.
Sorry. And there were debates. I mean, the law, when drafting the law, this was probably the first time. The drafting process included many actors in the society, like NGOs, like IOM and the academics and the other, policymakers as well as the bureaucrats. So after all the discussions, the word harmonization has entered to the law in correspondence to integration. Okay, so now some members of academia in Turkey uses the word harmony and harmonization instead of integration as a discourse. I mean, this is a very important discursive change, actually, relying on the policies, etc., etc. This is something that I'm criticizing, actually. Yeah, but just an example of how powerful can be these relationships.
The same is happening in the Roma studies, of course. I mean, we have to struggle in Spain to use the term Gitanos when we refer to Gitanos instead of using the term Roma. Because, of course, not only NGO receive money from, the donors, the discourse of the donors is really important in the knowledge production. So, you have now Gitanos themselves that started to speak about themselves as Roma and started to create a Roma association, while to call their association Roma Association instead of Gitano Association. And there is this influence from. But when we made this workshop in Barcelona in October, I guess one of the main, when we speak about knowledge production and the relation between knowledge production and policymaking, I guess we should make a distinction between the production of practical knowledge, which policymakers ask to researcher, and then the influence on the discourse. So the task and the responsibility of research to challenge and to change the terms of the debate on certain issues. No, so of course when you speak about knowledge production, about production, of practical knowledge, the frame is normally call for tenders, call for grants, European projects that define, donors defining the main discourses and main goals. Of course, inside of these, we received funds. I received personally funds for working with Roma, but in my project I was trying to deconstruct this. So you have a certain freedom, no? Also within this frame. But you are offering a service to public, to donors. And then you have independent independent in the sense that you have your funding from one side, and then you try to elaborate, to make your trips with your theoretical stuff and so on. And you have to create ways to change the terms of the debate. So maybe also when we're speaking about films, movies or what, how do you, I don't know. So this was like a spleen.
Oh, I think we opened up a really huge debate topic. That I think is really important. And I think that there's actually, these are all just my personal impressions and observations, that there is not as much interaction between sort of this policy world and academia as there could be. I think that there needs to be further discussion and debate on this, because I think we're only touching the surface now. I don't think that you'll ever have it one way, because policymakers will always have specific requests for data. So I don't think that that's going to go away. There will always be a call for something specific, or saying we have a lack of data. We don't even know how many Roma there are in exactly the numbers. That won't go away. I'm not sure if it's possible to have this, to construct another type of method where you could only have academia feeding into policy. But I see some potential for certain mechanisms, like if you look on the European level, whenever certain policy files are being discussed, be it disability or Roma or whatever issues, they have these platforms where NGOs are feeding and civil society are feeding in their opinions. And this has evolved over the years, and it's really strong, and it's quite developed now. And I can use the example of like the Roma debates, and they have, the Commission is supporting this Roma platform, and really, okay, you can question who are the Roma NGOs that are coming to that, and whose interests are they representing. So there's always that question. But the fact is that there is this space now where these perspectives are being put on the table, and policymakers are being told you have to at least consider that those are some arguments out there. And I see this as something that is kind of lacking for academia. I don't see like a platform where researchers, regardless of whether they were commissioned or independent researchers doing whatever their own topics are, I don't see a platform for that to feed into policy. So I mean, maybe someone somewhere can work on developing this. I think it would be really useful, because I don't think that policymakers are always going to academia. On the flip side of that, I think there's another issue of justifying, okay, if you do open, and maybe this is a reason why policymakers don't go too much into academia, because they say it's knowledge production for that sake. We commission our research. If you start looking at certain academic reports or in the field of Romani studies, how can you justify that you were referencing this study and from this researcher and not from another one? So then you either have to tackle all of academia on one topic or none. And so probably it's easier not to inform policy only from that direction, in that maybe we're not there yet, I don't know. Probably for this afternoon to discuss further.
So many thanks to everyone. Actually, this was sort of a warm-up. We're running short on time. So we're going to have lunch. It's scheduled at the CRAI, the same building where we were yesterday. And then we will have the second session this afternoon at 3 p.m., but not in this room, in the claustrum, which is downstairs, where you will see there is the photo exhibition, and that will be, I hope, even more interactive and more debate in depth on this same topic. Thanks.